Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon, as the case may be, depending on where you're located. Welcome to the Stratum Insight class for today. We're going to cover today, we're going to talk a little bit about, I believe, hopefully you're here to see or hear about voids and identify sales opportunities for users. So I often hear this called voids and white spaces. So we're going to talk about building Stratum views for voids and white spaces. So with that in mind, I thought I would show you a couple different things that show up with regards to that particular question when we get that here at Sylvan. So a couple housekeeping things first. I have all the phones muted. You can enter something in the Q&A section on your WebEx session, or if you have a question, or if you wait to the end, I will actually open up the phones and we'll take some questions that way if we don't get too many people on the call. Looks like it's kind of under control right now, so I'll go ahead and unmute the phones at the end, and I'll take questions at that time. Or, as I said, you can use the Q&A feature within WebEx. So voids and white spaces. This is something, we get this question every now and then about how do I, and it comes in two flavors. One is what isn't someone buying that they used to buy, and how can I see that and maybe track that? And then secondly, what aren't people buying? So a separate question, maybe a little more generic, and answer looking for cross-sell and upsell opportunities where it's just, hey, I've got a set of products, who isn't buying them, and how can I find that in Stratum? So, and by default in Stratum, when you run a view, it shows you what has happened, not what hasn't happened. So that's kind of the problem that we get to in these scenarios. So I thought I'd show you a couple different ways to look at some of these things and talk through those. And I was just going to show you some specific things in Stratum that might help you see some of those things. So let's tackle the first question I mentioned. What isn't someone buying that they used to be buying, and how can I see that? So I have a view that we use and we show pretty often. It's called Customer Review, and the question might be, for this customer, specifically, what have they bought in the past, or what do I expect them to buy given their buying patterns, versus what they're buying right now today. And today obviously could be a day, it could be a month, it could be a week, whatever time frame. In this particular view, it's going to be what are they buying this month, in the current month, and it bumped up against what they've been buying in the past. So a couple different ways that people might want to get to that kind of a customer review, I think, is also an interesting piece. So one is, I'm going to go in here. This is a new feature in 6.7 that's available. This is recent and favorites. But I'm going to go through here, and I'm actually go to my customer review, which you can see I've run recently down here. And that customer review pops up, uses a prompt. I'm not going to go through how to create prompts, but this is certainly something, if you guys aren't using them, you might consider. But I'm going to pick one of my customers, and I might come in this way. I'm going to pick Auburn Providers. And this is so I can see the view this way, and I'll pump that up a little bit so that you can see that. The other way that people might pursue a view like this, and I'll go through this view in some more detail in just a second, but is we also see people coming in via maybe another application, something like here I've gone into Salesforce, and for those of you, and Salesforce is just an example in this case, but I might come in here and say, so I'm at my Salesforce homepage, customer I look at all the time is Auburn Providers, and I might link into a Stratum from here and want to see, again, the same piece of information for this particular account. What haven't they been buying? So in this particular case, this view is almost exactly the same as the one I was showing directly in Stratum. But you'll see here this actually goes to the item level. So let's just look at this view real quick and understand kind of what we're showing the user, the end result here. So what I'm really looking at here is product mix, and I'm doing a comparison of product mix that they're buying this month or they have on order this month versus what they've done historically. And if I go over here, or in these first couple columns, this is just the actual sales for the current month. In my demo, the month is always September. So our current month is just September. I also have what's on order. So those are just two very common Stratum things. And then the other is, what are the expected sales this month? So These expected sales are just the sum of these two numbers, and that just tells me they've already bought the 5,900 that's listed there, and then they've got on order that we expect those orders to close this month, another $2,700. And I'm doing this in dollars. Obviously, you could do this in units as well. Now, the other number that's interesting, or other couple numbers that are interesting after expected sales, is I'm using a calculation in Stratum that allows me to see percent of total for the month. So this particular column is very simple to define. I'm using a Stratum-based function. When you're building a calculated measure, I'm just going to go into the functions. And down here, you can see we have a percent of total. And all you do is say percent of total, and you select the column you want to do that on. And this is my expected sales column that we saw right here. So this is just the percent of total for what we expect them to buy this month. And I've split that across everything they have on order or have bought. The other number that makes this view work is this column. And this is, in my particular case, I'm saying what have they bought on average for a rolling 6-month period. You can see I've popped that up. I've also used, this is a calculated column, obviously. If we look at that, it's amazingly enough data for the last 6 months divided by 6. So that's all we're doing there. And that allows me to by the way, in that calculation, I just meant to say I should have probably used the Sylvan function over here that says divide by with zero check. Really, under the covers, achievement percentage and divide with zero check are the same calculation. So that's why it says achievement percentage there. But nonetheless, by using these functions, I'm protected against the divide by zero error that might pop up. In my particular data, I don't have that case, but it could happen, and here's where you could protect against that. And I've just divided by 6. Since I've made this, I have a hidden measure that's just the last 6 months of sales. So this could be last year's sales, this could be a rolling 3-month sales, but this, in my case, I'm using a rolling 6 months average to understand that. And then I've said, hey, what's the percent of total for that? So I'm looking at their product mix as it's averaged over the last 6 months versus the mix in the current month. And I'm doing 2 things. One, I've got an up and down arrow here that helps me understand what's the percentage of change in mix for this particular product for this customer. So I can see maybe I'm interested if they've had a big swing in this particular customer. Maybe down here 7% less than they bought last year. Maybe a big swing in y'all's case might be as much as 10% or 20%. But whatever it may be, this helps you understand what that might be. The other thing is I've highlighted this here where it says, hey, they haven't bought anything, but they have been buying over here, and that's a little bit of a concern. So I've just used a conditional format to turn that blue, saying if it's equal to 0, make it blue. And that's a standard function in Stratum. I assume everyone knows how to do that. I'll just quickly show that. That's on the expected sales measure, so I'm going to go down to the expected sales measure. I just double-clicked. That popped up, and you can see up here I've got the conditional format, and I can just bring that up, and it's pretty simple. It says if it's 0, I change the format to turn blue. For everything else, just leave it the way it was. So pretty straightforward stuff in terms of how to do that. I have a pop-up expression there. You can see when I rest the cursor there, it tells me blue indicates purchases, expected purchases, meaning I've had purchases in the rolling 6-month period, but we don't have any this month, and that's a little surprising. And that, by using expected sales, I'm saying not only have they not bought anything, they don't have anything on order either. That might be an interesting thing to evaluate. So this particular view, when people talk to us about white spaces or voids, helps me understand what people have done in the past versus what they're doing now and where there might be an issue or something I want to sell into. To take that a step further, I've added 2 other pieces of information on here that might be of interest beyond just the fact that they haven't bought and there's been a significant, or there's at least been a change in their actual product mix across these things. I've added fill rate information. Now, not everybody has fill rate and on-time delivery, but are these products, something that we've had issues with, et cetera? You can see that kind of thing by maybe evaluating the fill rate. And then the other thing that everybody can do, here I have a sales status indicator that lets me know they're up or down, the expected sales versus average. But but then I can actually click on this as well, and that's going to spawn another view. So when I clicked on that, this opened another view specific to that product. You can see up here it's filtered on meatloaf, which is the product that was an issue. It's also filtered on that specific customer. We were looking at Auburn providers. But this now shows me a rolling 3 months of everything the customer has done. I'm sorry, a rolling 12 months going backwards, starting in the current month, going back to last October. Everything that that customer has bought, what they paid, the average case, in this particular case, we sell by cases. So you can see all of that data. I've got it graphed. You can see that their buying pattern on this does have flat spots. This customer buys this product cyclically, and maybe we're in one of those down cycles now. Although I go out here, it's about time for them to start buying. If I just look at this graph and say, hey, usually they don't buy for a couple, 2-3 months. 1, 2, 3, we're in the 4th month of them not buying. That's a little concerning in this case. And I can also see what they've paid, et cetera. So that's just the idea of being able to see additional information by linking views together. So that's the first question I was going to address was, what has a customer bought in the past that they aren't buying right now today, whether it's for the current month or current week, depending on how you evaluate your cycle. So that view is pretty straightforward to create. I think that everyone could pretty easily get the sales and orders up there. Assuming you have orders, they can probably create a calculation to add the two things together. And then the 6-month average is what I've used here. Obviously, you could use a rolling 12. You could do this weekly. If you want to figure this out on a week basis, just use a week calendar instead of month. So those are pretty straightforward things. Interesting points in this view are a couple new features that are used. I got here using recent and favorites, as we saw earlier, so this is a cool new feature. This was not about this. I believe there was an insight on this a couple weeks ago, so I'm sure this was talked about. But the other thing is, note in this particular column where I have a calculation that the dates are in here. This is March through August, so this is happening by in a calculated column. You can now reference the date captioning information that's available from the components of your calculation. So that's a separate thing, but it's a calculated column. In this particular case, it makes sense that I want to see it because this tells me this is the average over March to August. And as this view, as we move into month to month, this is going to roll with me next month, meaning in this case, November. This will say, April to November, or I'm sorry, April to November. So, or April to September. So it'll roll with me and those captions will change automatically. So enough on that. That's one style of that view. I think this is a pretty easy view for people to set up, whether you're getting to it this way or you're getting it through SharePoint. I'm sorry, through a link in Salesforce or some external source. You can take advantage of these things. So with that in mind, let me show you another view. I want to talk now about the question of people buy. What didn't people buy? So they've possibly never bought something. And in Stratum, as you know, when you look at a view, that typically means that you wouldn't see that data if there's no historic data that they bought it. Like this view is showing, the reason these things are showing up is their sales history. And so I have data in this column, which then allows this column to show up with nothing in it. So the first part of that is to talk a little bit about what the end result is. So here I've got a view that is product voids by city and customer and who hasn't bought stuff. So the concept of this view, when we pop this up, this is showing me that in the state of Illinois, for these customers, which are my Illinois customers, so they got my customers going across the top, this shows me everything for this set of products. So I'm focused on my fruit products in this case, who's buying which fruit products, even if they've never bought them before. And that, I'm just going to shrink this up a little so I can work the view a little better. There we go. So, but that that's the end result I want. Again, the blue is marking voids where this customer's not buying it, but I can see that customers in the same area in Illinois, I'm doing this by state, so I have other Illinois customers that are buying that. So if I feel these products are regional in nature, or there's at least regional demand, I can now see that, hey, I've got a customer, I've got at least there's a weird mix of products here. So the question would be, why aren't some of these other products selling? Now, could be, something about the customer, et cetera. But at least in this case, I've segmented a like group of customers, in this case, everyone that is in the Chicago or in the Illinois area. And here's a set of products that I'm targeting. So this is the end result we're looking for. This tells me right away that I've got voids. I can see I also added sales last year to see if it was just a case that they weren't buying it this year versus last year. So, and an interesting thing here, if I take this customer and just drag it over here to this Illinois, you'll see here I actually, for this last customer for SFC distributors, this last row, typically in Stratum, this row would never show up because there's no data for that customer. Whether it was last year or this year, there's just no data. But in this case, it's showing up. So the question becomes, how do I do that? So let me show another view that is, I'm going to call this more of a normal view, should there be such a thing. Again, just to show the setup for this. So I'm just in a view here. This is showing me rolling 3 months this year versus last year, previous month this year versus last year, and year-to-date this year versus last year. Very straightforward, simple Stratum view. I come in, and the thing that we want to focus on here is this view shows me stuff that has happened. So this is a regular Stratum view, and I do that, and that happens because by default in Stratum, we actually have a couple of filters on the row and columns that say, hey, only show me stuff if there's a numerical relationship, meaning between this division and these brands, there were numbers in the measures that I have in this view that are in at least one of these columns. So that says only show me that stuff, and that's combined with what we call the empty filter. So those two things together work together to help me say I only want to see stuff that has happened. So that's how it runs by default. I highly recommend that's how you run the majority of your views, because if you don't, you can start to see things you won't expect to see. Because if I said, say, go division to product, and let's say you have 100,000 products, typically you'd only see the products that sold in that division. So the division might be a little high level for that. But if I took a salesperson or a customer sold to and started this view with that, and you can imagine now I drill to the customer, well, or to the product from here, or the product, if I drill to the product, that's fine for a single customer. I'm going to get a list of products, but they probably don't buy all my 100,000 products. If I did that for every single customer, or even if I did it for this one customer, and I said, don't use those controls on the row, don't have the relationship filter and the empty filter that says only look for things that have happened, it's going to show me every single product. I get 100,000 rows on this view. So that's why by default we run with the relationship filter and the empty filter. You only want to see the stuff that's happened. But for today's presentation, what we're trying to understand is white spaces, or what didn't the voids that this customer didn't buy. So to do that, we're going to take advantage of turning off some of these filters, but I'm going to be very careful about how I do that. I'm going to make sure I have other controls on these dimensions that won't just give me an unlimited number of rows, or at least the total set of all of the data that exists. And there's really two ways in Stratum you can do that. So what I want to do is go back to my other view, and we have this very simple view here that's just showing this year versus last year. But what we like is that it shows me this customer's never bought anything in this particular state. So what that means is, how am I getting that guy to show up? That's an interesting problem. So in this particular case, I'm using, and by the way, there was a post on this. We had a customer actually ask about this out on our blog, and you can see here, where'd it go? Yeah, here it is. There's a white space thing. So if you guys aren't following the blog, you might want to, but this has something, you know, we got the question, and you can see I posted a couple things just talking about these options that I'm going through right now, and I included some examples on this. So you know, there's some good information out here, and that's kind of how this, by the way, this Insight class got started. We started getting questions about this, so we thought we'd bring it up and talk about that. But some of what I'm talking about is available out on the forum that you can get to from sylvan.com or customernet.com, or from your homepage if you're using our normal homepage. So back to our story. So for the customers, the way I'm limiting, so when I go to the state of Illinois, we can see here, if I open up the View Explorer, that if I look at my rows, those features I was talking about, I've turned them off. I have empty filter off and relationship filter off. So what's interesting about this is, as I described, you can imagine you probably have tens of thousands maybe of sold tos, or thousands anyways of sold tos, but this list is only showing me those that are in Illinois. By default, in Stratum, that relationship may not be in place. That I know only the customers in Illinois. The reason I know that in this particular case is state is what's called a virtual dimension. And I can tell this is a virtual dimension actually because if I go here and I look at you'll see there's no relationships, no attribute relationships or pickup fields. And you can see that here, no descriptions, anything. Other than that, it works just like a regular dimension, but that is we have, in my demonstration, we have a virtual dimension that's derived from the customer sold to. So Stratum under the covers now knows that for this state, only certain customers exist in that state, and that's how it's limiting what's listed here. If I didn't have that set up that way, I had these relationship filters turned off for the rows, regardless of if the customer was from this state or not, Stratum wouldn't know that, and it would just give me a list of all of my customers, whether they were in Illinois or not. So that's one limiting control that you have. That's called virtual dimensions. That's a setup that would have to be done in configuration. It's very simple to do. Doesn't generally require any real additional coding. Any pickup field or attribute that you have in place today could be made a dimension, and that would then define to Stratum a relationship between that entity. And in fact, if I go here and I go to the Edit Attribute Relationships, with any luck, I'll find a state here. Sold to province or state. There it is. I'm going to add that and show this, and you'll see, amazingly enough, these guys all have Illinois as their state. So what I did was I turned this pickup field or attribute into a dimension that we're looking at here called state. And that's how Stratum knows the relationship between these customers and state. So that's what's limiting what's showing up on this view right now. Now, the other part of this is, obviously, this is interesting that this guy didn't buy anything, yada, yada. Yeah, I really want to say, hey, I've got some products that I want to know. That's really what we're trying to get to. Who's not buying something? So now I've got this view looking a little different. I've said, okay, so now I can see for this set of products which customers aren't buying them. And these products, when I say this list of products, if I hover here, this tells me this is filtered with a user list. I'm going to assume everyone knows what a user list is. If you don't, real quick, the idea is in Stratum, you can build lists of stuff, whether it's products, customers, whatever. It's a feature any user can take advantage of. Any advanced user or higher, I think, can take advantage of this and build lists. And these lists can be, you can select, in my case, I don't know, I selected fruit products. So I went through our products and selected everything that was kind of fruit related and selected those things. So this again, though, this is a way to limit which products show up on a void display like this. And that's an important part of this, where I talked about Stratum knowing the relationship between the state and the customer. There is no relationship between a customer and products. And if I turn off these features down here, this relationship filter, if I don't have some way that I'm limiting which products are showing up on this display, it's going to run away from me. If I had 100,000 products and I didn't have some kind of filter or list of product control here, this would just give me for every customer all 100,000 products and whether they bought them or not. So in my particular case, I'm focused on our fruit category. I've got those products. And I'm selecting those, so I know this won't run away from me because I've controlled the number of products by adding in the user list here. So now I have a control on which customers show up, and I have a control on which products show up. So I can turn off these relationship filters, and the view won't do crazy things, and I'm in good shape. I can also, though, now look at this as more of a matrix where it might make a little more sense, where I'm just going to take the customer and drag it up to the columns. Now this implies an important thing, that on the columns, as we were talking about on the rows, I've turned off the relationship filters. You have to turn that off on the columns as well. No, you don't, because I actually have this limited by the state. I forgot about that. So but if I put the products across the top, we would need to have the relationship filters turned off because I need to limit that stuff. So here you can see, though, now I've got more of a matrix, and it visually helps me understand these customers and what they're buying versus the other customers that I have there. So this is showing me for this set of customers what they're not buying within this state. And of course, I can still drill around. This view works fine here. I can look by state. I'm probably not that interested with customers going across the top here, but I could select another state. Maybe I'll pick, I think I've got customers in, Ohio is another one. So I'll pick Ohio, and I probably wouldn't, I've only got one customer in Ohio. So let me do this. Let me take the customer, drop it on state, and, here in Arizona, now I'll drill on Arizona, or I'll go Arizona to customer. I'll take the customers and drop it up here. And now I've got that and then I want to drill down to product, like we were showing before. So now I've got that same matrix I was looking at, but now for my customers in Arizona. And you could do this a lot of different ways. I could put the products across the top, the customers down the side, however it is you want to do it, right? I could actually say, put the customers here. So I wanted to do that. So if the customer's in Arizona, and then I want to get the products across the top, that's pretty simple to do. I can just take the products and drag them up here, drop the products here, and that top stuff across the top is limited again by my you can see the filter I have on products right there. If I click on that, that'll show me, it's my fruit products I'm listed on. So I'm limited on. So a couple other things here. You can see I'm actually using the new locking rows and columns for those of you that haven't upgraded. You can see the descriptions aren't going away there, both vertically and horizontally. That works now. So that's kind of cool. And then, of course, I can do it this way, too. I can drag the products down here. So however you want to look at the voids and white spaces, you can do that in Stratum by understanding on each of the dimensional qualities in your view, in this case, customers and products, how I'm going to limit what's displayed. And then the second thing is by taking advantage of what we've provided in terms of turning off the relationship filters, which will show me data that has not happened, which again is not the default in Stratum, which is to show me things that have happened. So with that, that's kind of today's session and what I wanted to show you. That's white spaces and voids, so you can begin to understand what people haven't bought. I'm going to go ahead and open up the phones here and see if anybody has questions.
Unmuted.
Hopefully everybody heard that. Everyone should be unmuted. So are there any questions on what we saw today, or do we call it a day and everybody goes to lunch? Okay, I'm going with silence as no questions. So I think that will wrap up today's session in terms of voids and white spaces. I hope that was helpful for everybody. If you've got other colleagues that might want to see or hear about what we did here today, know that this particular webinar is available, will be available as a recording, and will be out there shortly. It takes us a little while. We do a little bit of editing on them, so you'll be able to see that stuff and re-listen to my exciting presentation on voids and white spaces. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it, and everybody have a great weekend.